you. You ready?
Okay, we're quiet.
Okay, we're fortunate today to have Judith Delmar with us today.
Thank you.
And Judith was born in Denver and has lived in a lot of different places, including St. Louis and Chicago. They then moved on down to San Antonio, where her family has lived for a long time. And then they spent a lot of time, almost every weekend, and on their vacations here in Rockport. They have deep ties to the Rockport area. And Judith is going to tell us a little bit about her family, the Frandoligs, here in Rockport. She's a MD by profession, worked with the Air Force in HIV and infectious diseases.
Wow.
So that's quite a career.
I was an internal medicine doc, and I never did a fellowship in infectious disease, but along about 1986, when they began to have tests for the HIV virus, the military realized that, you know, their troops are young and they're sexually active, so there could potentially be a big problem. And especially since, you know, blood banks and transfusions, so they started screening their forces. And then I was the person that took care of all of their active duty troops. And initially took care of them until they died. But long about 1996, when meds came on board, just took care of them, okay? Because they continued to serve and get promoted and marry and have kids and, you know, all of which is possible these days.
Even though they were positive?
Yes, because if their medications control their viral load down to 0, it doesn't transmit, okay? Doesn't transmit, and that's why antiretrovirals have been such a godsend and why the World Health Organization and everyone wants them for the world. In this country, the epidemic has been gay men and bisexual men and drug-affected users, then into the black community because of some of the rates in incarceration, okay? But worldwide, this is a heterosexual disease, okay? And worldwide, far more women than men have HIV and don't do well with it. One of the highlights of my career has been able to go overseas with the Air Force and, you know, sort of assist in Africa and teach people about initially HIV and then now violence against women, because those two things are pretty tightly linked as well.
And the women don't respond to the medication as well?
They do, but the world, I'll just say, the whole world is a patriarchy. The United States less so, okay? So women's rights and the ability to access medication, to essentially say yes to treatment around the world, to not be beat up or called a witch or killed, you know, has been pretty horrible. So, you know, these days we don't get a lot of call for HIV lectures, but we do for how to combat, you know, gender-based violence. So I still do that. I volunteer, but I don't take care of patients anymore. But I will say, Rockport, so ties for me, you know, once we moved to Texas in 1952, virtually whenever we could, we would be down here. I was looking at the comments on Key Allegro here and noticed that one of them is from Tex Shearer. And you know, one of the cottages that used to be for rent. I remember spending a lot of weekends, etc., at those cottages. My dad would go floundering. You know, we would go fishing. Didn't have a boat at the time. Eventually had a boat, and eventually built a house. But yeah, Rockport was home of the heart for a lot of us, actually. Yeah.
should be able to use the. You got it? There you go.
So you guys know this man, right? Everybody knows this man. Renaissance man, Colonel George Ware Fulton, okay? And he really was. I mean, looking at his biography, the guy did it all. I mean, he was a school teacher. He basically was a watchmaker and an inventor. Was a cattle baron, developer. Of probably most consequence to my family, who didn't interact with him but interacted with his heirs, was that he was the father of one Harvard lawyer, and I suspect another lawyer as well. So the Frandolig and their presence actually began with Franz Josef, who also was called Franzi. Now he's buried on Port A, okay? He was an early Texas settler around the 1830s, 40s, essentially rounded up cattle, drove some up to Kansas. I know that he was in B County, Duval County. I don't have a real good record. I can't trace all of that. But basically, he was a homesteader on Frandolig Point. And we call it, I mean, you know, in San Antonio, it's like, I was Judith Frandolig, but honestly, down here, I'm a Frandolig, okay? So basically, that's how they pronounce it, Frandolig. He homesteaded it. He was a farmer. Basically, I'm told my Uncle Jimmy in his interview for the Historical Society had talked about having a fig orchard. My dad remembers that they grew lots of vegetables and was kind of like a greengrocer. So there would be fishermen and boats, okay, that would stop and buy from him.
Wine too.
Yes, and
By
wine.
the barrel.
Right, by the barrel. And I don't know whether he had actual grapes or Mustang grapes.
I know they had grapes there, but what type, I don't know.
Okay, because I mean Mustang grapes, you know, are wild. But considering that he came from Austria, would not surprise me that, you know, he did have grapes, okay? For the longest time, my family didn't know where he came from. We didn't know where anybody came from. There was, did he come from Italy? Because there's some Frandolia, or, you know, I mean, if you look in the census and you look through Ancestry.com, there's questions about, are they related over there in the old country? And then considering what he named his kids, specifically Napoleon Bonaparte Frandolig, okay, there was, okay, so were they from France, you know, so we didn't know. But obviously now it is known, he did come over from Austria. His wife Hannah, I mean, those look like hardy stock. When you look at them, you know, I can understand that they were able to hold on to Frandolig Island. In my family's legend, basically the descendant, James Fulton, okay, in around 1879 or thereabouts, kind of tried to evict the old man from the island. And according to my dad and all the stories I used to hear, he basically stood him off with a shotgun. Not until much later did we find out that he actually stood him off in the courts. And to me, that's the more impressive of the two. And I'll talk about that a little bit. So, let's see, let me go back here for just a bit. In terms of these other folks, I have really no knowledge, so I'm not going to be telling you anything about them. I'd love to know more, but I just don't, okay? So the next part of this, I don't know how many of you are Tom Petty fans. I won't back down, gonna stand my ground. Okay. So that's basically certainly one theme song for Franzi. And then the other is Send Lawyers, Guns, and Money. Okay. And the reason for that, basically, is Fulton versus Frandolig, okay? So this actually was tried in the Texas Supreme Court. And ultimately, the old man, FJ, he won. Now, he didn't have lawyers, okay? So he tried his own case. And it all boiled down to the fact that the Fultons, when they had bought the land, and they bought quite a bit of land, and certainly ran a cattle operation. I don't know whether theirs was the one on St. Joe as well, but it may have been. They had it surveyed. Well, as coastal land tends to do, water comes in, it goes out, there was a channel cut, and basically FJ had homesteaded the place. When they tried to evict him, he said, I have improvements on the land, you know, this is what I'm doing. So basically the court then said, the survey line actually ends, you know, in the middle of the water, but before FJ's Frandolig Point begins. So he got to keep it. And this case actually is cited a few times now in maritime law, so riparian rights law, okay? Which I think is kind of interesting from somebody that, you know, certainly didn't go to grade school, but he was an impressive guy. Ultimately, he did develop some of his own property as well, and did wind up eventually moving to Port Aransas.
What time frame was that suit?
So the suit was, got started around 1880 and dragged on in the courts for about 5 years. So 1885 is the decision. You can Google it. I just did that and kind of copied just the first part of it, okay? It's not a long decision, you know, but it is there. Okay. So Grandpa Boney, Napoleon Bonaparte, okay, he was a ship's carpenter. Basically he was also known as B.A. One of his sons was Jimmy, not his sons, his grandson is Jimmy, the one that is recorded here on an interview. But one of his sons was William Cornelius, okay. My granddad was Frank Frandolig, okay. B.A. essentially married a woman by the name of Mary James that came over on a ship from Ireland, okay, in the great sort of Irish migration around that time frame. And may have been, in my mind, I sort of had it that she might have been a mail order bride almost. I mean, basically, you know, men were looking for wives, you know what I mean? They had a few kids. My granddad, who was Frank M., my Aunt Noni, who was a personal favorite of mine, Tankersley, and I'll talk about her in a little bit, and then had a son, Uncle George. James S. actually died at sea. He was a sailor. George never really married. He was kind of an old bachelor, lived with Grandpa Boney and Noni and her husband on a little farm out on the way to Aransas Pass. And one of the places I used to love to hang out when I was a kid. All right, come on. I wish it would show up in the same spot all the time, but it doesn't. Okay. So Jimmy's interview kind of states, around 1903, the family upped and sold Frandolig Island because FJ had moved to Port A by that time, to somebody by the name of Hertzberg. I don't know whether I'm spelling that, because this is an oral interview, who eventually either forfeited or sold, but it went back to the navigation district, who had plans to develop it, the whole area, to dredge it and so forth. And that was around in 1950, thereabouts, 1960s. That sign, I remember walking past that sign actually. One of the little blurbs from the navigation district said, This will be a great tourism development because there's a sandy beach. Well, my family heard that and went, oh, well, we have to fight that. So I remember as a little kid, walking with my uncle and my dad and my brother down these oyster shell, not a sandy beach inside it. We didn't want to go inland at all because, yeah, as my Aunt Valley said, watch out for them ground rattlers. Okay, so, yeah, we didn't want to encounter the local inhabitants. So, but it did look like that. Okay. So this is my granddad, and we called him Daddy. He was a railroad fireman until he retired, and he retired down here in Rockport. The railroad actually, I think the last train was in, oh God, let's get this right. 2007 maybe, the last freight train. Obviously they had passengers only for a short period of time, but at one point in time the Rockport Depot actually was a pretty lively railroad hub. So he was a railroad man. Mama, who was May Morrell, one of two sisters that married Frandolig brothers, her sister Lizzie married William Cornelius, okay. They both came over from Ireland, okay. Little convoluted family history. Mama was lace curtain, very proper Irish lady. And Daddy, I mean, I think I heard somebody mention that the Froniches drank a bit. I think Daddy drank a little bit. He didn't drink like the brothers drank, okay, but he would tipple a little bit. And plus he's a railroad man, so he was kind of had a little bit of wandering in his bones. Moreover, I think he probably didn't agree with my dad being sort of railroaded into the seminary to be a priest, which he was. Okay. So the upshot of all of this was that these two separated. Mama went to live in San Antonio, took the kids, okay, other than my Aunt Laura, who hadn't been born yet, to San Antonio, okay, where essentially they went to school. Daddy, until he retired, was down here, and he used to hang out at various haunts, okay, which I'll show you. Of his children, I'm going to concentrate on my dad, but my Aunt Mary, how could I possibly leave her out? I've left out Cecilia Nathan, who is Papa's sister. So Cecilia Fromage Nathan actually was right around my dad's age, and she lived down here as well. So Cecilia and Mary, basically, and my mom all wound up during the war in San Antonio being taken care of by Cecilia's husband. I don't have the pics, my brother has them and we don't speak, but there are beautiful, beautiful pictures of those women, and they were lookers. I mean, they were just gorgeous. And I'm sure that my Uncle Sanford used to have to beat the guys off with a stick, but they were always riding to their hubbies overseas.
Which war are you talking about?
WW2. Yeah. So, okay, and both Charlie and my dad served in the war. So here's the railroad depot in Rockport, okay? One of the places, obviously, that my granddad would hang out. This, that at one time was Klein's Cafe, I think before that was a bar. And I actually remember going in there with Daddy. I mean, as part of his rounds, he'd go to Inez's bait stand, hang out with Inez Fleming, spend time at the turning basin. Essentially, I fished for piggy perch with the bamboo pole. Used to catch them by the score.
What time was that?
1950s.
Okay.
Okay. when it looked pretty much like this, okay? But Inez is still there. Basically, it was great. I mean, I'd have a wonderful time. It wasn't like he would go into the little corner bar and get drunk. He'd just go in and have a beer with his buds. Then he'd go down to the post office, and we'd go to the turning basin. So it was a great, place to hang out. So kind of memories of Rockport of my granddad. My Aunt Noni, if you think that down this way is Aransas Pass, okay, and this way is Rockport Fulton along 35, okay, she would be back here and off the road. And that was Boney's farm, where Guy and Noni and ultimately Georgie lived, okay? So I have the most wonderful memories of her farm. Small amount of acreage, okay? 2-room shack, and then one of them was not the bathroom, okay? Which was outdoors. We were sitting around just talking one day, and my dad was looking at Guy had made an improvement on the place and had put a door in between the 2 rooms. And he's sitting there looking at it, and Papa says, "Guy, it's a beautiful door you got there." "Well, thank you, Frank, thanks so much. Did you realize that you hung it upside down?" Because the keyhole was upside down. So Guy had a line tension for a long period of time. He could see, but they used to work at Castor Lines, heading shrimp, et cetera, to supplement their income. So I remember that Noni was written up in the Corpus Christi Caller one Easter because her chickens laid these colored eggs, which some breeds of chickens do. She was really pleased about that. The geese, the gander used to chase my brother around all the time. So the peacocks were like their, you can think of them as their ADT home security because they raise a ruckus. And basically they also had guinea hens. They always had a sow and shoats. They had a milk cow, and they always had a calf, and it was always named Deep Freeze as a reminder, okay? Not to get too attached. They did. They had Uncle Georgie's parrot after he died, and ultimately it went to my dad. They had 5 dogs named Jack, okay? Basically, which kind of slept with them, And my Aunt Noni, she had little warts here, she had little gray hair in a bun, went barefoot most of the time. Basically, I remember sitting around under the trees with, my mom was a very proper lady. My dad's sisters were semi-proper, and we were just having Cokes and beers and whatever. The kids were up in a tree looking and listening to the adults talk. And basically, my mother was deathly afraid of snakes. And one just kind of took off, and I think it was a racer, actually. I don't think it was a rattler. But basically, Noni just bent down, and she's talking this whole time, and grabs it by the tail, breaks its neck, tosses it away. And my mother just, fortunately, was a woman with a strong heart. Otherwise, I think she would have been gone right then and there. I remember seeing that and just going, yes, that's my aunt, okay.
The parrot by Uncle
Georgie.
George.
So
Where did he live?
he lived with, there were a couple of Georges, okay? So there was George Frandolig, who was Boney's son, and then there was a George Morrell that kind of came in a different, sort of, not a Frandolig,
Did
but
any of
very
them
Frandolig.
live in Old Rockport here in the old section we're in right now?
Probably. I mean, I know Lizzie did. Yeah, for sure she did. And I'd love to know where. I mean, I have a mind's eye view of her house, which was actually a pretty house.
I remember a house with a parrot, as a
Do you?
kid, 6-year-old kid, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
And the parrot
Uh-huh.
had some language that my mother didn't.
Well, Georgie's parent, outlived Georgie, and by a considerable amount. And I think Georgie was probably slow, everybody else worked kind of as carpenters. All of Willie's kids did, Jimmy was a shrimper, but I think Georgie it said he was like a vegetable peddler, and I think it was just like whatever he could do. And because he was a bachelor, never married, wound up living with them, I think he was probably maybe a little slow. Okay, so anyway, I would prefer my Aunt Novi's to the carbon black plant any day of the week. Okay, so my dad, okay. F.M. Frandolig Jr., who I call Papa, and our whole family called Papa, or Buck, I've heard him called that as well. Also known professionally as Frank Matthews, was a radio TV newsman in San Antonio. He moved with his mom and his sis to San Antonio. He attended both Jefferson and Breckenridge. After the seminary fiasco, which he says he got out of once he read the Rubaiyat, or Omar Khayyam, he said that was it, I'm out of here. Something about don't blame the pot, blame the potter, he was gone. He enlisted for WW2. While he was working as a hotel clerk, he was briefly married, which I actually didn't know until I divorced my first husband. I was kind of devastated, and Papa was kind of, well, you'll get over this, I did. I went, huh? And so he proceeded to tell me that, and a couple other family secrets that my mom told me, and I kind of went, okay, I never needed to know that, but he thought that he was bucking me up by giving me that info. So my mom was in like Indiana, Chicago area. They met at a USO dance basically before he was fixing to deploy overseas, knew each other 2 weeks, got married. His sisters, scooped her up, brought her down to Texas for the war, and then he served in the Italian theater. And he had these great pictures, I know Vesuvius, of the plane flying over. When he got back, and probably because in WW2, broadcasting played such a key role, and the broadcasts, people would listen to it, and the broadcasters were so respected. And he had a really sonorous voice. So when he got back, he said, that's what I want to do. So his career took him Brownsville, maybe the Big Bend area as well, Denver for sure, because my mother, I was born in Denver, she reactivated tuberculosis during her pregnancy, and then we moved to Chicago, St. Louis, so I could live with my grandmother and granddad while she was in Healthwind being treated for TB. So I didn't see her for the first 2 years of my life. So, at any rate, she gets out of the Healthwind, and basically Papa says, we're going back to San Antonio. I remember we came at Christmas, and Mama's house on Hackberry Street. Daddy was in one room holding court. Mama was in another room holding court. And they would sort of sneak peek at each other, I think they really loved each other, but just couldn't live together, Basically, I had another uncle who was career military that had just gotten back at the time from Japan, and all of the family reunited. And it was a pretty wonderful time on Christmas Eve, even though I was expecting cowboys in the street, and I did not see them. Okay, as a 6-year-old, you're interested in that sort of thing. So this funny-looking guy was my dad. So this was his yearbook from basically Jefferson. This is 3 years later from Breckenridge, and that's where he graduated. So in his career, early highlights, WAI eventually turned into KMOL, still located down there on St. Mary Street in San Antonio. But it did radio and TV, and he did both. And he did both at the same time for a period of time. One of the things they had was that they had a country music show, among other things, where basically local entertainers, including Patsy Cline, and other people would come in and take these shows. And periodically I used to get to go and hang out with Papa at work when he did his 10 o'clock. And basically the teleprompter would feed in, he'd kind of go through his stories, put together his newscast, and while he was doing that, he would just park me and I'd get to watch like the country music people. So this guy here is Red River Dave. So Red River Dave was like country music, but also sort of semi-folk singer. Ballad of Emmett Till is one of his tunes that he wrote. And I remember actually seeing him in one of his shows. So not only did he do the news, but he did other things as well. So, reading the newscast is one thing. He would actually go out and report those. So if, for example, if LBJ was in town, he might go out and cover the press conferences on the ranch. You guys have any idea which one that might be? That hurricane? Okay. So it actually made a career of a newsman, not my dad. So Dan Rather, okay, basically for his coverage of Carla, was promoted from his TV station, to the national news. He wasn't the only one. He was in Texas City at the time, but he wasn't the only one that was out there in the wind and the rain. There were a few others. My dad was one from Beeville, and I think before Carla, you didn't actually see that. Now, anytime there's a storm, anytime it rains hard in San Antonio, you got somebody out there, wading in the water. So, on the scene, was kind of something that he would do. He also loved to do, he would do little, you can think of it as an excerpt of the week's news that he put together for the Kelly Managers Club and the Rotary Club, and he would give those as well. And he created a program called Conversations, which was quite a big deal, actually. That's the one thing my brother has that I wish I had. I'm going to see if I can't bust them loose from WAI, but they tend to throw their stuff away. But he would have whoever was in the area. It might be a newsmaker, it might be a celebrity, and he would just sit down and talk with them for about 30 minutes. They also sort of were one of the first stations that had the early news at 5 o'clock, okay? So that's my dad, and this is Martha Buchanan, Jerry Desmond, who was their weatherman. Basically there aren't too many footages from WAI, unfortunately. So his heart, though, was here. He would leave his 10 o'clock news with his suit jacket and his tie and the raunchiest pair of Bermuda shorts that you could imagine and his flip-flops because the desk covers all of that stuff. Okay? And we would hot-foot it down to Rockport. Basically, just spend every bit of time that was free here. We'd crab at the ski basin in Fulton. I do remember all the aunts and uncles, maybe with a few beers, don't know, basically getting all their cars stuck one night. Okay, and having to wade back to my aunt's trailer. They didn't, by that time they definitely were not buzzed, and had to go and unstick the cars in the morning. Fishing for piggy perch, yeah, with Bill the Pelican, which they were all Villa Pelicans. We'd always go to Port A. We'd go to the local beaches as well. Before they dredged for Key Allegro, Rockport Beach was a beach. I mean, there was a lot of sand in that beach. I remember walking out quite a ways. And every August, the mullet would come in rivers. I mean, really in rivers, along with the cabbage heads, also in rivers. And we'd have cabbage head fights, you know. Yeah. And then certainly, once he got a boat, we would do that. We'd water ski in the ski basin there in Fulton. And then once he built a deck, or a house, we'd hang out on the deck as well. Lots of poker, lots of tall tales from relatives, some of which I've come to find out are true, okay, after researching this, but some of which are apocryphal. So places that we hung out, Mom's is still there. Captain Jim's in Fulton is no longer there. But I remember, you know, we would go there before you get to Castorines. Mary's Malts, which was a local landmark that had like 36 different flavors. You know, we'd come from swimming in Rockport, and Mary's Malts was, you know, big deal. I think that was before Whataburger even showed up.
Where was that?
It was downtown Rockport, okay? Pretty close to the turning basin, I think. I'm not sure exactly where.
I'm thinking was right next to Klein's.
Could have been, in that general area, yeah.
Because the structure that's, the top, the roof,
Uh-huh,
that was constructed, if it's the same
Yeah.
one I'm thinking of, that was actually a shed for Higgins boats that Rob Roy.
yeah, I mean, you
rides.
kind of get the idea that behind all of this is the turning basin and maybe
Well, it's
even
a
the
shipyard.
maritime, yeah.
It's shipyard
Yeah.
and then the jetty. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
basically.
right in there,
Yeah.
yeah. And then recently, unfortunately, the Duck Inn is closed, and, you know, basically, yeah, we used to hang out there as well. Used to have great food when I ate there, okay. All right. So the other thing is that we'd always go out to the wildlife refuge and to Goose Island and catch the big tree and the hoopers and the javelinas and see the spoonbills around Little Bay. Okay, so basically it was you know, kind of our 2 weeks were pretty packed. So from the deck of my dad's house, we would look out and see Paws and Togs, and it looked just like that, okay? Obviously, this is the front of the Fulton Mansion, but when we were living there, it was white. It was before their restoration and before it went gray even, okay? They used to have a restaurant in the place. We ate there once and took a little mini tour. I remember being really super impressed with a couple of things. They had like a grandfather clock that would play melodies, you know, the little discs, etc. And the kid looking out his room with a telescope that you could see like forever, you know, up on like the third story or whatever, probably up here. So I'm pretty sure, and I need to drive down the road to confirm this, I think that their house, which is still standing, obviously not owned by us, is where that tree is in Fulton, from the 1919 hurricane. Timothy? Yeah, I think it is. Okay. So they were right behind the mansion and the Bay whatever courts. Okay. So yeah. Oops. I'm going the wrong way. And favorite thing to do. You know, so we would always essentially, used to take Dad's boat, eventually we'd now take the jetties out to St. Joe, and just beachcomb up and down, okay? And love St. Joe Island a lot. Okay, so this is my dad, my mom, Betty Kuznick. You know, I basically could do an equally detailed thing on her family, just as interesting, but this is Frandolig.
Where are they buried?
They are buried in Fulton, real pretty, up on kind of the hill,
Fulton
Fulton
Cemetery?
Cemetery,
Okay.
yeah. And this is my brother, and this is me. I've been married twice. My name is Pitt, okay? I changed it with the second divorce. I'm proud to be a Frandolig, but I got so tired of having to tell people how to pronounce the name, you know, have people, you know, they're reading you out in class, and it's, Jude, blah, 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 you know, so I said no. And I didn't want to use my first husband's name, which is my son's name, Talbot, and I definitely didn't want to use my last husband's name, okay? So I kind of went, I'm gonna pick one. So I called my son and I said, I'm gonna change my name, how do you think about that? He was, you know, in college at the time. So what do you want to change it to? I said, how about Lamar? He said, sounds like a cheap detective novel. How about Delmar? Okay, I said, sold American, so it's just part of the divorce decree. And that's what I go by. Ooh, and I just spelled my brother, it should be George. Okay. So this is my dad, okay? And that's what he looked like pretty much in his later years, and certainly when he was doing the news. When he was buried, my ex, my last ex, who I'm still friendly with, it was very sudden. It was a heart attack. I was an intern in training at the time. Mom called and said, your dad's in the hospital in Corpus with chest pains. And this was on a Friday, and I thought, well, I better drive down. I gotta get time. You know, nobody was particularly scared of this. You know, and but I figured, well, you know, I can interpret. Every doctor kind of knows that you can always be an interpreter for your family, you know, what they're saying, you know, what they mean, etc. So we hauled my son down, you know, to Corpus.
From?
Yeah, from San Antonio,
Okay.
which has been home for me, for the most part. And the minute that I pulled in to the hospital, my Aunt Seal, Dad's sister, came toward me, and I just collapsed. I mean, you know, when you know that your legs are going out from under you, they just did. I mean, I just knew, you know, he was dead. So I never got a chance to say goodbye, which was kind of tough. We hung around for the funeral. My ex put a copy of Crossing the Bar, which was my dad's favorite poem, Twilight and Evening Star, the Tennyson poem, about crossing the bar of the sea, in the coffin. We were driving back, and on the way back, it just came to me from the airwaves, like it's my dad, okay? This song. And it kind of has like a Ray Charles piano that I can hear, and the words just came pouring out. So I am scrawling it on my copy of the Rockport Pilot, etc. My ex now performs it. He's a singer-songwriter, and a guy made a video of his life that actually, in a lot of ways, was based on it. I am going to go out of this, and basically, I am going to pull this up so that I can read it to you. So, time is a bandit, brother time, he's a thief. Precious hours gonna rob them, every moment he'll cheat. Spin the world on its axis, past that one special smile, past the glance from your lover, precious laugh with your child. Please, Papa, a story. Hey now, play with your friends. I'm tending to business so our means can meet ends. When silence is falling and the day's work is done, time to rock-a-bye, baby. Look around, and he's gone. If I had a genie and a lantern of gold, I wouldn't take treasure, pleasures grow cold. All the world's power won't hold back the chimes. Just grant me 3 wishes, make each one of them time. Beauty so fleeting and love, well, it's rare. From cradle to coffin, not a moment to spare. Got to savor the living, make each hour shine, so it glows like a beacon for that old rascal time. Yeah, time's a bandit, time is a thief. Of the memories you're making, which ones can you keep? Let your heart open wide so it captures each smile, every glance from your lover, each laugh from your child. So that's courtesy of my dad. Okay. And because I didn't get the time to say goodbye. And now, because my ex is dwindling from Alzheimer's, it is doubly a message for me. So it's my touchstone. And I leave it to you. Okay. And that's all I,
Yes.
so questions. I ran on for a long time.
Is that what's
Great.
Not
Just set the
really. He may have, there's a guy that plays it much better than Frank does now, okay? And I love his version of it, and it's in the video, but I'll have to see if I can get somebody to do it. Just put it on the YouTube channel, yeah. Just because people play it with guitar, but seriously, I hear da-da-da-da, you know, that little Ray Charles, da-da-da, da-da-da-da, and I can't do the piano. I'm sure somebody could.
Very nice.
Credit the man,
When did he pass
courtesy of
away?
him, seriously, you know, the channel opens up, it comes through.
When did he pass away?
1980, February 25th, I believe, yeah. In, was it Spahn Hospital in Corpus, I think? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. That was really good.
Thank you all for